In today's show, the Trailblazers don't make any moves in the opening day of free agency, and that should come as no surprise. This was always the plan based on what they've done so far. Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You are listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making this show your first listen, coming at you each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. So make it a part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen. Tell your friends to do the same as Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's show, we're talking about night one, day one, afternoon one of NBA free agency, where the Blazers did nothing. Of course they didn't do anything. If you pay attention to their recent run of moves, it was clear that today wasn't the day to make a seismic change. They've already made those, and the choices they made led to the planned and probably rightful inaction on day one of free agency. We'll talk about the things they didn't do and why they didn't do them, the gift of roster clarity that they are offering you, plus who did make moves in free agency, what teams in the West got better and what teams got worse, and what that means for the Blazers' future. We got a lot to get into. Let's get it rolling. First of all, of course the Blazers didn't do anything. Of course they didn't do anything. Because they've already done the moves they have made thus far informed the, quite frankly, probably necessity for an action in free agency. Let's get into all of that and what I mean by that. DeAndre Ayton was bought out on the eve of free agency, and according to Jake Fisher of Bleacher Report and the Stein Line, DeAndre Ayton reportedly gave back about $10 million off his $35.5 million salary. Gave back to get out of Portland, to be free, to all of those things. Theoretically mutually beneficial for both parties. Ayton won't clear waivers until Wednesday. I think the overwhelming likely destination for him is indeed the Los Angeles Lakers, a team without a starting center. And Ayton, if for all his flaws, is probably still a starting center in the NBA. He's still a starting caliber center in the NBA, albeit with some real challenges as what he sort of brings to the table. But when the Blazers chose to say, like, we are not, I think it's a pretty compelling case. You can say DeAndre Ayton was the best as of Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon. He's the best center on the Blazers roster. But the Blazers, when they chose to buy out DA, reach a buyout agreement with DA, and he gave some money back. They chose to say, hey, we're going to commit to Klingon. We're going to commit to Young Hansen. We're going to commit to finding spots for Rob Williams when he's healthy and available to how he can contribute. And we believe that Duop Reith can be, fill in the gaps as needed. But they also freed up the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which is a contract that starts at $14.1. I think I said 14.5 on yesterday's show. $14.1-ish million. It can be up to a 4-year deal, but it starts at 14.1, has escalations up to there. That's your non-tax. They're free of the tax, and Ayton's buyout allowed them that room to use the mid-level exception, the full mid-level. But what you're offering with the full mid-level is like a contract, again, that like a lot of teams can use, or a contract like a tool, a free agency tool, because it's not cap space. It's like it's a tool for teams that are above the cap but are not tax-paying teams. A tool to sign players that many teams will have access to, right? So you're offering like a relatively market standard contract, albeit how much you offer is I think is the sort of relative difference. But after they made the DeAndre Ayton move, like, what are they really offering? Think about it. What the Blazers in free agency are looking for realistically is like a fourth forward behind Denny Avdia, Toumani Camara, and Jeremy Grant, a fifth center behind the aforementioned Klingon, Young, Duop, Reith, and Rob Williams, a fourth guard behind Drew Holiday, Scoot Henderson, and Shaden Sharp. And that is assuming that Matisse Thybulle doesn't exist, because he could be your fourth guard or he could be your fourth forward. And Matisse Thybulle does, in fact, exist and is at least a very effective defensive player, even if he has some warts on offense. When I would say a moment here. When free agents are choosing where they want to go, they're choosing usually about three things: money, role, proximity to a championship. So first of all, how much money can you pay them? Okay, the mid-level exception, a lot of teams have about that kind of money. So the money might be about even for sort of the level of players that Blazers are bidding for. Role. What's the role look like? How much playing time do I have? Do I have an opportunity to start? That matters. Money and role. Some players are like above money and role, but typically in free agency, the way it's worked over the last few years is like you're signing like role-ish players. Like you're not like stars don't really change teams in free agency in modern NBA. So you're signing role players. So it's available playing time and what, kind of opportunity on the roster, the money that you're offering them. And then if those things are relatively equal, typically the deciding factor is proximity to a championship. Certainly like warm weather, close to family, the tax situation in Texas and Florida versus like Southern California and Oregon. But like money, role, proximity to a championship. The Blazers have money, but they don't have a realistic role, as previously explained, like fourth forward, fifth center, fourth guard at best. And they certainly aren't selling realistically like proximity to a championship for anyone that pays like real attention to the league. So like what are they? Of course they didn't make any moves early in free agency because they're looking for a back half of the rotation player. They have 13 players under contract with 2 roster spots. If I had to guess, I bet they'll only carry 14 into the regular season. So really you're offering 1 roster spot. You're talking like a deep bench guy. Deep bench guys sign for the minimum. Deep bench guys you don't spend the mid-level on. Before the Blazers chose to waive DeAndre Ayton on Sunday night, I think perhaps making a more aggressive splash in free agency would have been believable, albeit with less to work with, right? They had a lot less wiggle room below the tax line. But if you are like rolling forward with these like expensive veteran players on the roster, maybe it does make sense to say like, well, might as well sign someone and just like, maximize the sort of overall talent level that we've got available to us. Like let's sure, like maybe we're creating a logjam and maybe it's like blocking young players from playing. But if you're going to keep Ayton on the roster and you're going to move forward into the season, there is an argument to be made. Spend the money in free agency, maximize your chances. Go. Like don't no half measures, right? Well, a lack of movement after the DeAndre Ayton decision to buy DeAndre Ayton out, after waiving DeAndre Ayton, makes a lot more sense. It makes a lot more sense because what the Blazers chose with the Ayton move was to clarify the roster, was a decluttering choice. I think in some ways the Anthony Simons trade for Drew Holiday can be viewed in the same manner. It is a trade to try to make the roster make more sense and commit to the young, giving clear paths, clear opportunities to the young core, the young players that they have recently drafted. No log jams, no one like very specifically in the way. If Ayton was on the roster, he's going to play 30-some minutes a night, right? He's going to play like 31 minutes a night. You're talking 17 minutes of extra center time behind him for Klingon, who was pretty good in year 1, and for Young Hansen, who the Blazers went and got, right? They went and got their guy. If nothing else, the Blazers have given you the gift of roster clarity. By making the moves they have made to thus far in free agency and through the draft and through the trade market, by making the moves they have made thus far, they have given you the gift of roster clarity. Maybe not the gift of roster excellence, that's something that remains to be seen, but at least a gift of clarity of roles. With some caveats. Let's talk about those caveats. Let's talk about the sort of bump still there. But I do believe that not making a move in free agency makes total sense given the bigger picture. Let's talk a little bit more about that in the second segment. Join me there, won't ya? First, though, let's talk about FanDuel. We got summer sports rolling along, whether that's baseball, the WNBA, or footy. We got the MLS, we got the NWSL, we got it all here, and FanDuel is the best way to make every game, every match even more exciting. So listen, if you're a sports fan, you're already following the action. If you want to add a little thrill or just a little more interest, FanDuel can help you get in on the game while your friends are just chilling on the couch, or maybe they're out doing whatever they are doing, and you're adding some excitement to your sports viewing. FanDuel makes the FanDuel as an app is super easy to use. It's super clean. You're going to find bets on everything from pregame odds to live betting. You can build same game parlays. You can, bet pregame and watch that ride out all the way to the ninth inning if you're a baseball person, or deep into the 90th minute if you're a footy fan. FanDuel can help you be part of the action. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. So open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right. I mentioned the gift of roster clarity. By making the decisions they've made, the Blazers have said, we're going to prioritize, we don't want Ayton in the way of Klingon and Young and Rob Williams, should he be healthy, right? We want a clear path for those gentlemen to play. And they didn't want to take back multi-year contracts because those, not only would it clog up the books for when extensions would potentially kick in for Shaedon Sharpe and Toumani Camara should they sign them to those extensions, but those players would be on the roster next year. They've given you that clear path. They've given you the question remains whether clarity leads to success. In the grand scheme, the math hasn't changed for the Blazers' ultimate path to success. If this is going to be a good team, one of either Shaedon Sharpe or Scoot Henderson has to get really good. There's a world in which Toumani Camara takes this massive step forward and becomes Scottie Pippen, but that seems maybe a little bit too far afoot. And Denny Avdia was obviously very good last year. And was the Blazers' best player, but it's does he have 3 tiers up that he could go? Maybe, I don't know, maybe, right? But I think the Blazers' best path is banking on one of these dudes who has not celebrated their 23rd birthday yet to take the big leap. That's why you draft guys in the lottery. The overall math in that instance hasn't changed. That's still their path. Roster clarity doesn't necessarily make it any cleaner for those guys to get really good. That probably is the onus is largely on them, but roster clarity, getting guys out of the way so young players have opportunity to play, and there's no pressure on the coaching staff and no awkwardness about who plays, and Anthony Simons is the longest tenured player on the roster, and DeAndre Ayton's making $35 million. So there's the sort of the political stuff that goes into who plays and when on an NBA team. That in some ways has been removed. I think there's still question marks in general about how exactly Drew fits into the equation, although broadly speaking, it's a relatively minor question because theoretically he fits very well. He can play next to Shaedon Sharpe as a 1. He can play next to Scoot Henderson as a 2. He can be an off-ball guy. He can toggle on the ball a little bit. In theory, Holiday is a much, much better fit than Anthony Simons, and Holiday of the last half decade has been a much, much better player of Anthony Simons, albeit he is 8 years older than him and is coming off kind of a down season. So, if Father Time is a factor, that could be something. But the theory of why Drew Holiday fits with the young guards and fits with the roster is very clean and very obvious and very easy to sort of comprehend. Theory and practice are suite mates, not lovers. They do not share a bed. They maybe share a room. They share a larger apartment or something. But they can you can get there, right? Because theory and practice could meet up and share a meal, and then anything's possible. You find interests that you find shared interests, and really a spark could happen. Theory, practice. Now they're truly in love. So there's questions about where Drew Holiday fits. There's questions about Jeremy Grant's role, because he is like the most natural spot for Jeremy Grant would be a bench role, right? But he is the Blazers' most, well, he's I was gonna say most veteran, but I forgot that Drew Holiday's old. He is a veteran player. He's paid a bunch of money and paid to be a starter, and started the majority of last season when he was available, and kind of when they kicked it into gear, they moved Jeremy Grant into the starting lineup. But like in like the sort of ideal world for the Blazers, Grant's a bench guy, right? Like you start the young guards with Scoot and Shaedon Sharpe, you start Tumani and Denny, who are better than Jeremy Grant, and you bring them off the bench. There's a question about his comfort. I think it was pretty clearly reported, at least here on Locked On Blazers, that's why you listen to the podcast, that Grant had some discomfort about his role last year. But like part of running a basketball team is managing the discomfort. Part of like Chauncey Billups' job is massaging egos and dealing with all of those things. And part of the front office job is being clear about like, we're giving you $30 million. Like this is your role. And like you will still be getting your 105, 106 million bucks over the following 3 seasons. Be cool. So there's questions about Jeremy Grant's role and future and his comfort on the team, and like if they do roll with the bigs and it's with the sort of big forwards and it's Jeremy and Denny and two, like which guard gets squeezed. If they roll with those guys, Andrew and both young guards get squeezed, that's weird. But like the Blazers have created a path where it is relatively simple for at least one of the young guards and Scoot and Shaedon to start, both young forwards to start, and a young center to get action, right? They've created roster clarity. They've decluttered the roster. That is what the DeAndre Ayton move really signaled, was a decluttering. It isn't, I wouldn't go so far as to say it is picking a direction, because as I mentioned, the direction will be defined largely by the same thing it was going to be defined by in the past. The general development of the Blazers' young players. If you pick a path and the players aren't good, it doesn't matter. Like that doesn't matter. Congratulations, you picked a path that didn't work. You need to pick another path now. So I wouldn't say that like, okay, now they've clearly chosen a direction. The direction will choose itself. What they have provided is clarity and a decluttering that allows for this to happen in a way that is smoother, easier, and simpler. Whether it works is kind of another question, but I would say what they've done is allow for the question to be answered in a more simple way. I will say this. Waiving DeAndre Ayton after trading for him and having him be in some ways the centerpiece, at least initially, of the Damian Lillard trade, although I think in hindsight, the centerpiece of the Damian Lillard trade turns out to be Tumani Camara, but like it's not exactly like a deft maneuver. This isn't like the best asset management, right? This isn't like perfectly structured moving on, taking trading a paperclip and making it into a Learjet or whatever. This is kind of just like realizing that your Learjet needs more repairing than you can afford, lighting it on fire and leaving it in someone's parking lot. Like, it's just like, yeah, this didn't work out. Let's get out of here. I think there is something to be said for making a decisive choice in saying like, this is the clarity that helps us find out what's next. This is the path that will give us the easiest way to know what we have. This is the way to declutter the roster, make those decisions, and get where you need to go. This particular podcaster, the young man that you are listening to, increasingly less young every day, the young man you are listening to or watching on YouTube, depending on how you consume this here podcast, has been crying and whining about the Blazers picking a direction and clarity. And so like, while I still reserve the right to be somewhat skeptical of the sort of overall what's on the other side, making a clear path, saying like this is how we get there. We don't know what's over there, but this is how we get there. I can't hate on that. And that brings me back to the free agency part. Adding a free agent, particularly a big money free agent, would have just added more clutter to this thing. Like certainly, and I didn't even mention Ryan Rupert and Chris Murray in my sort of like math about who plays and when, because like if the Blazers are fully healthy, those gentlemen are probably out of the rotation to begin with. But like what the Blazers need in free agency is probably like a shooter that can play a little bit, but like you don't have a clear role for them. So what are you offering the Luke Kennards of the world? Guess what? He's already gone. And they probably could use an emergency point guard type, but an emergency point guard, like a fourth point, like a end of the bench point guard for like insurance purposes, is just not a player you target in day one of free agency. And because the Blazers made these moves to give themselves more space and less clutter and sort of more clarity of sort of roster and roles, not making a move made sense in light of all of the other choices. That doesn't mean it'll work. That doesn't mean it's a necessarily good plan, but at least it is a choice. And as someone who has whined about their sort of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, what are they doing? And I think even in light of the initial Drew Holiday trade, my main reaction was like, yeah, Drew Holiday might be really good, but like, what are they doing? I don't understand it. I think I have a better understanding of what they're doing. I'm not gonna say that you aren't allowed to be skeptical and you have to like all hail Joe Cronin or whatever nonsense. Like, I don't believe that. What I believe is that these are choices that allow for easier evaluation, and that the evaluation will probably give you the final judgment on whether it works. But if you don't create a space that allows for evaluation, you're not doing yourself any favors. The Blazers have given you a gift of roster clarity. Now you figure out whether this clarified roster makes any sense. Speaking of making sense, speaking of like being talented enough to take off, I think the Blazers are decent. They could put out some really good defensive lineups and may struggle to score every single night they take the floor. But I want to look at other moves that happen around the Western Conference and talk about where the Blazers stack up. I think they're still a play-in hopeful at best. But let's talk about the moves that did happen on day one of free agency and where the Blazers are in the pecking order. Join me in that third segment, won't ya? Still a pass first point guard. I'm still Mike Richmond, and you are still listening to Locked On Blazers. Let's just run down the West. We'll do it in the order of the standings that ended the year and talk about who did what and where the Blazers might stack in the pecking order of day one of free agency. I waited until like 11 p.m. to record this out of respect for how news works in the NBA. So if I do miss anything, just know that it happened like, after 10:30 on Monday evening here out in Portland. Oklahoma City, they won 68 games last year. They're still friggin' good. That's how this one is going to work. They're still good. Houston, I think everyone is going to call Houston the big winner of the day, and probably rightfully so. They added Dorian Finney-Smith, who left the Lakers. That's important, and ended up in Houston. They also added Clint Capella because every team needs 3 good centers, I guess. Şengün and Steven Adams and Clint Capella. That's a lot of centers, but Clint Capella is, at least in theory, a very useful backup, and that's helpful. Houston also retained like all of their ancillary pieces. Aaron Holiday, Jeff Green, Jae'Sean Tate, like everybody's back in the pool. They probably have too many dudes, but they've got a lot of talent added next to Kevin Durant. So that team's still very good. The Lakers, I think they got worse because they didn't end up with a center. They're seemed like extremely destined to sign DeAndre Ayton in free agency once he clears waivers. But I think they're certainly worse. They lose Dorian Finney-Smith, who's like such a crucial part of their already kind of questionable defense. They added Jake LaRavia, a nice bench piece. Like LaRavia is certainly better than I thought he would be in the pros. Shout out to the former Wake Forest standouts. But yeah, the Lakers are worse. I think that's helpful for the Blazers and anyone and true Lakers haters out in the world. The Nuggets, who were the 4th seed in the West last year, they traded Michael Porter Jr. for Cam Johnson. Cam Johnson famously went 11th in the draft. Cam Johnson went 11? That's love, bro. Cam Johnson's good. He's probably overrated. Like, Cam Johnson's my guy, dude. Go Tar Heels. But like, probably a little overrated with how impactful he is right now. But I do think pretty darn helpful for the Nuggets. Adding Cam Johnson and a reunion with Bruce Brown, that's good stuff. In Denver, the Clippers added Brook Lopez because they are interested in being old. Deeply invested in having gentlemen who have already celebrated their 35th birthday. They've retained James Harden. They still employ Kawhi Leonard. Now they've added Brook Lopez to the bench. I do think they needed another center. Like, they always played funky small lineups when they weren't, when my man Zoo wasn't in the game. But like, Yeah, well, Brook Lopez 37. At some point, that matters. The Timberwolves, I think they're still one of the very good teams. They chose to retain Naz Reid and Julius Randle, and they let Nickeil Alexander-Walker go. He heads to Atlanta. The Hawks. Everyone's going to say they're cooking too. What you're going to read tomorrow, or maybe you've already read by the time you're listening to this, you're making this your first listen, I appreciate it, is like, Houston and Atlanta had good days. They've had good free agent runs, and they've had really nice off seasons so far. Shout out to both of those organizations for putting it together. But the Wolves, they retained Naz Reid, they retained Julius Randle. That's still a team that's going to win a bunch of games. Warriors haven't done anything. TBD on Jonathan Kuminga. They did lose Kevon Looney to the Pelicans. Sure. The Grizzlies, boy, did they spend a lot of money today and still have to shed some money to make all these moves even official. They re-upped Jaren Jackson Jr. for a ton of money. They got Santi Aldama back. They're going to add Ty Jerome. They're going to waive Cole Anthony, who they acquired in the Orlando trade, in order to make all of that happen. This is probably good business. It's a ton of money for Jaren Jackson Jr., but he's a very good basketball player, and that's kind of the point of having a team. Santi Aldama is someone I really like because of the passing and the sort of off-the-dribble game. He's interesting. He can play like small forward and gigantic lineups a little bit, like in part because of like what Jaren does. And he can also play a little bit of like tiny ball 5. He's a 4, but like I like Aldama. He's a Mike Richmond favorite. Cole Anthony, hope you get a new job. Ty Jerome, they're betting on him and the shooting and off the dribble stuff and the strides he made in Cleveland, translating for the Grizzlies. I think that helps. The Kings reportedly added Dennis Schroeder, although I think that deal's not finalized because they may end up sending out Malik Monk in the process. And they're also probably in the Russell Westbrook business, adding Schroeder and Russ. The Kings are so weird. Adding mid-level free agents to that particular team, it's like, the Kings are going to Kings. The Mavs, they got D'Lo. They got D'Angelo Russell, long reported by Mark Stein of the Stein line that D'Angelo Russell was going to end up there. Like if Kyrie Irving isn't available for the first 55 or 65 games of the season, the Mavs aren't very good. If Kyrie Irving is available before that and ready to ride, like coming back off an ACL injury, they're going to be good. If not, I think they're not very good. The Suns, they're chilling. They had Colin Gillespie and EuroLeague standout and former Wisconsin great. Shout out to Frank Kaminsky and Sam Decker. Nigel Hayes Davis joins the Suns. That's meaningless. Those are, I mean, maybe they'll be meaningful, but those are not big ones. I think the takeaway from night one of free agency, Blazers don't do anything, right? They don't do anything, is pretty much everybody's trying to be competitive in the West except for the Jazz. Shout out to the Jazz. When Austin Ainge took over the job, he said there won't be any more roster manipulating. You're not gonna see that again. So you know what he did? He just waived Jordan Clarkson and then traded Colin Sexton to hell. That's also known as Charlotte, North Carolina, where the Hornets have not won a playoff series since George W. Bush was in office. That's real. That's a real timeline. My goodness. It's like. No, like we're not going to do any of that. You're not going to see any of that roster manipulation stuff, I believe was what Austin Ainge says. Like you won't see that this year. Yeah, because they're going to trade their vets so they don't put themselves in awkward positions. The Jazz are going to be bad naturally, not by instead of by hook or by crook last year when they got like in trouble for just like holding veterans out of the game, out of the lineup. Like they're not going to do that this year. They're not going to get into that mess. Instead, they're just like not going to have good players on the roster. That's how you tank, baby. You just don't have a roster good enough to play. But the other 14 teams in the West are going for it. Like, I don't think the Suns are very good. I think the Mavs just health-wise are dicey. I think the Kings are pretty mediocre. The Pelicans are obviously an absolute mess. They signed Kevon Looney. Their roster makes zero sense. I was texting with a friend today. I was like, I really like free agency because I think like one of the most fun parts of the NBA is like building a roster that makes sense, right? You build a roster that's complementary. This guy fits. We are allowed to play different shapes. Like I think like the fun part of why Houston is so good is because they can play like super big. They can play smaller lineups with all wings. They can play lineups where Kevin Durant is like functionally the center. They can play lineups where Kevin Durant is functionally the shooting guard, right? Like they can play so big, so small, so many different, like throw me so many different looks at you. I think that's one of OKC's strengths. It's so many different ways. Like the parts fit and they fit interchangeably and they allow you to do different things and play up and play down. or the Pelicans, just a roster that just makes no sense. And I was texting with a friend. I was like, I like free agency because you get to see teams build smart rosters that make sense together, and then you get to see like the other half of the league build rosters that make almost no sense together, and that's equally fun. And I feel like that's what's going on in New Orleans. So like, the Jazz are the only team in the West that's like clearly is not interested in winning. The Pelicans just traded their freaking lottery, their first round pick unprotected next year. So like theoretically they're invested in being good because like they've given away that draft pick. Yikes. Even like let's just say the Pelicans stink because they probably do, right? They're probably like a 30-win team. The Jazz, they're bad too. The Suns, like they're worse talent-wise because they lost Kevin Durant, but they won 36 games last year. And if you were like, hey, the Suns are going to win 35 games this season, I say, yeah, that seems fine. So like, I don't think they're materially worse than their record was a year ago, although they're just not very good. That's three teams that are probably, when you just kind of like look at the Blazers roster, that you could say like, yeah, Portland's better than Utah, better than Phoenix, better than New Orleans. Sure, probably. I think Phoenix could be peskier than maybe I'm giving them credit for right now, but I just don't love their roster. The Kings are a mess. You could talk yourself into the Blazers being better than them, although I think like right now they have more talent. Talent and success are not always one-to-one correlations, but I think those are the teams, and the Mavs are like such a question mark just with their health. Everyone else, like some of those, like I said, the California teams have some downside. The Clippers and Lakers are old. The Warriors are just like old, and we'll see where they end up. Like, but I think when you look at where the Blazers stand, they are a team that's like in the play-in-ish range. They're somewhere between the 12th and 9th best team in the West, depending on how aggressive you want to be. There's an upside world where they jump to 7th. There's a downside world where they fall to 13th. But they've given you the gift of roster clarity. They're going to play. They have a plan in place to have a clear evaluation space. And for me personally, and from my perspective, I'm not invested in the Blazers being a playoff team next year. I don't think they should care about being postseason and all that stuff. And I would say their moves thus far in the offseason have allowed them to cleanly both not care about that and evaluate their young players. And I think that's about as much as you could ask for. Whether it works is a question that we will decide down the line, but giving yourself a space to figure it out and not chasing like, okay, we gotta be the 8th best team in the West for whatever reason. There's much more value in just giving yourself a clean path to know what you have, as opposed to a determined path to find out if you can indeed be the 8th best team in the West for 2 seasons before being the 11th best team in the West for 6 consecutive seasons after that, because you just get caught in the middle, and then you get caught in the sort of down swell of chasing the middle. The Blazers didn't do anything on night one. Eventually, they'll have to do something, either expand the Drew Holiday trade or make a minor move in free agency. But if you're expecting them to use that big old taxpayer mid-level exception, non-taxpayer mid-level exception, the full MLE, don't. They're not going to do that, because if you look at the moves they've made, it just doesn't make sense with the roster. Success is a little bit different than plan. The plan is clear. Whether the plan is effective remains to be seen. That's going to do it for today's show. Come back for tomorrow's show. We'll talk about whatever happens in day 2 of free agency and look ahead to the future of the Blazers. It's what we do 5 days a week, wherever you get podcasts, also on YouTube. I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon.